So here's a little diagram which explains roughly what's going on in biological reincarnation. So you've got these yellow and orange oblong shapes here. That represents the material body and the lower mind. So the material body and the lower mind is the one incarnation. We'll talk about what they are in just a second. And then you've got memory. So that's what we're talking about here. It's memory that gets transferred from incarnation to incarnation. So that's what this bluish thing, which is in loops, which is going from one incarnation to the next. Imagine it traveling from left to right, for example. And that is, you could call the soul, or the higher mind plus the energy body. So the higher mind plus an energy body together, that is the soul, or that is the memory. You know, way back millions of years ago, it would just be probably at some point in our distant past, it would probably just be memory. In early animals, for example, let's say a small lizard or a small mammal that's just started the reincarnation, the evolution of reincarnation, it would probably just be emotional memory at that point, something like that. But then as it's evolved over millions of years, it's got more and more complex. And now it's the higher mind plus the energy body that is reincarnating. So that is the human system. The soul plus the incarnation. That's the human system. So that's higher mind and energy body and material body and lower mind. But of course, we need to find evidence for this. So this is going to be a massive part of our research project, is finding evidence for those energy frameworks or the vehicles or the human system. So someone watching this may say, well, how does this work? What are all these frameworks made of? What is the higher mind made of? What is the energy body made of? So let's just talk a little bit about what is the soul made of. Now we're going to talk about this a lot more in anatomy, but here's just a little bit of a start. So we're calling this type of energy malleable magnetic energy. So everything is made of energy. Of course, everything in the whole universe is made of energy. We talked about this in the bioenergy layer. Everything is made of energy, different forms of energy at different frequencies and different vibrations and in different concentrations and all put together in different ways. But essentially, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same building blocks. And this type of energy is called malleable magnetic energy. And what does that mean? Well, it's magnetic fields. So magnetic fields is very well known in science, of course. Science knows a lot about magnetic fields. Half of our technology is based around magnetic fields. But what we're saying here is that there are parts of magnetic fields which are not yet known. And specifically the idea that magnetic fields can actually hold structure. But essentially a magnetic field is a vibration. It's a vibration of positive and negative energy. So all of the energy in the universe is created in a split, in a duality. We talked about this in lesson 2, the Aya Guide to Healing, where the source creates a separation of form, positive and negative energy. So all of energy has a positive and negative aspect to it. Magnetic fields are a vibration of positive and negative energy. In fact, it's actually bubbles of positive and negative energy like that, coming in and out of existence. That's what a magnetic field is. We'll talk about that more in the anatomy section. And these magnetic fields can actually hold structures. Now, this bit is not part of mainstream science. This is what we are saying. This is what our theory of malleable magnetic energy. The reason why science is not aware that magnetic fields can arrange themselves in these structures is because it's so weak. These magnetic fields that we're talking about are so weak compared to what has been detected so far in science. Now, the lowest level of magnetic field that's been detected in science so far is something like 0.5 femtotesla. That's the scale of strength of magnetic field. Now, what we're saying here is that it's way, way underneath that, so they haven't been detected yet. So that's why they are fairly unknown to science. But these magnetic fields can hold structures to them in the same way that atoms and molecules can hold structures. That's what our material body is made of, atoms and molecules. It's energy arranged in structures. So magnetic fields can also do this, but it hasn't been detected yet. And we're calling it malleable magnetic energy because it can form so many different types of structures. It's malleable, this type of energy. It's like Play-Doh or putty. You can actually form it. You can play with it. I say you can play with it. Evolution can play with it. Evolution can make lots of these different types of structures. And this is what accounts for all the energy anatomy in our bodies. Now, in contrast, what is the material body made of? Well, that's atoms and molecules, isn't it? But it's still positive and negative energy. And here we're talking about electrons, protons, and neutrons. That's what atoms are made of. Now, by the way, this little diagram that you got in there with the little balls, that's the classic representation of atoms. But they don't look like that at all. That's just a model. They don't really look like anything, to be honest with you, because they are made of fields. But really, the subatomic particles that make up atoms are electrons, protons, and neutrons. I'm not going to go over this much right now, but even these particles are made of positive and negative energy. An electron has a negative charge. A proton has a positive charge. Neutrons are neutral, but they are a mixture of both. They're a mixture of positive and negative energy. So that's what makes up matter. And you can quite clearly see that that has structure, doesn't it? So let's look at some of the energy frameworks that allow reincarnation as part of the human system. So we have the material body and the lower mind. What is the lower mind? The lower mind is an energy framework. It is a subtle energy framework, i.e. magnetic energy, malleable magnetic energy framework, which overlays the material body. Now, this has been part of popular mythology or spiritual philosophies or healing philosophies for quite some time, the lower mind. Some people call it the etheric template. If you Google etheric template, you get all sorts of stuff. But it's a template for the material body, or an overlay to the material body, however you want to say it. It's the same shape as the material body. It grows with the material body. It grows with the material body in the embryo and the baby. Really, it's part of the material body. We're just separating it out because it's a different type of energy. And there is a new field in biology called quantum biology, where people are starting to realize that there are quantum effects going on in the anatomy or the biology of the human being and other animals as well. And what I mean by that is quantum means the very, very small. So a quantum effect is very, very tiny, tiny, tiny effects that you wouldn't be able to detect normally, right down at the atomic level. And yes, so science is starting to realize that there's a whole world, a whole quantum world going on in our own biology. So research and finding evidence for the lower mind probably is going to be part of the field of quantum biology, I would guess. Now, the lower mind has lots of different aspects to it. There's an overlay to the nervous system. There is an overlay to most cells of the body, but it's not an exact copy. It's not an exact template. There are lots of other things going on in the lower mind, like there is the karma storage around the chest area. We'll talk about that when we talk about anatomy, don't worry. There are the organs to do with karma, or producing karma and processing karma. They are in the lower mind. Now, this again relates back to an ancient myth. It's been known about for however long as part of the yogic philosophies that you need to be in an incarnation to burn off your karma. That's what the endless, not endless, but they call it the karmic wheel or samsara, endless rebirth, having to come back into a material body to burn off your karma. There's a grain of truth under there because it's the karma organs in the lower mind that actually process the karma. So yes, the high mind, that's why the high mind does have to keep coming back into the material body and lower mind to burn off karma. So that's the material body and lower mind there. And that is one incarnation. And so that gets discarded in between. After one incarnation, that gets discarded. The soul carries on and then goes into a new material body and lower mind. And I keep drawing them side by side, but obviously it's one on top of the other, isn't it? It's more like that. It's one unit, really. We're separating out the material body and the lower mind just so that we can understand it more, but obviously it's all one functioning unit, really, this body. And now for the soul. So that consists of the higher mind and the energy body. Now, the energy body, both of these concepts are very well known already. Not in science, of course, but in spiritual philosophies and traditions. The energy body, also very well known in healing circles. The energy body is a energy framework, full body energy framework, which processes energy. Anything to do with subtle energy, I'm talking about here, which is magnetic fields. It processes all that and circulates energy around the body and does all sorts of other stuff. All the chakras are part of the energy body. The meridian systems are part of the energy body. The kundalini systems are part of the energy body. The karmic systems are part of the energy body. Now, the higher mind is the control system, you could say. Now, the higher mind is also a very well-known concept already. You could call it the thinking part of the soul, the higher mind. But it also holds a whole lot of information, or genetics. We'll talk about that a bit later on. So that's the soul, the higher mind plus the energy body. And that is also an integrated unit, of course. It's part of the same unit, in the same way that the material body and lower mind are part of the same unit. So I'm just going to switch to another program now, just to show you a better picture than that. So bear with me one second. Okay, so I have shown you this before, I think once, and this is going to be part of our anatomy lessons, but as we're just talking about anatomy now, I want to show you again. So I can turn off some of these frameworks. So let's start with the material body, shall we? Take off the higher mind, take off the energy body, take off the lower mind. So we've got the material body, and we can look inside the material body as well, of course. And I'm doing it in this way because I want to get you into this idea that it's all anatomy and it's all one system really, and it's all connected to everything else. And this is part of what this particular project that we've got going on here in this program. This is linking all those different parts of our anatomy all together and understanding how integrated everything actually is. So that's the material body. Now we can add on, or we can take away the material body and go to the lower mind. If I take away the material body, you can see the lower mind there. Now, obviously it's a lot fuller than that normally. So we've only put some things in there that are relevant to us right now. But as you can see, it's a full-bodied framework, and we've put an overlay to the brain, and there's some various structures in there that we'll go through when we talk about anatomy. So that's material body and lower mind, and we can add on the energy body as well. And this is where the meridian system comes in there, the chakra system as well. And then if we take off everything, we can actually look at the higher mind as well. We take off the energy body, take off the lower mind, take off the material body, and we'll go to the higher mind. Again, the higher mind is a full-bodied framework, and it looks quite a lot like the lower mind. When you actually look at them, they have quite a lot of similar anatomy. And you can see that one came from the other, or they have a common origin. You can actually see, I think I mentioned this before, you can actually see the lower mind and the higher mind. If you look very closely at your fingers, you can actually see a tiny little film of about 1 millimeter across, just going around your fingers. That's the edge of the higher mind and lower mind. So it's the same shape as the material body. Now, there's some very interesting things going on in the higher mind, which we'll talk about more when it comes to anatomy. But I'll point one out to start with, and that is this little thing in here. That is the awareness filter. That's where our awareness is happening. That's where our consciousness is actually happening. And that is being channeled through the higher mind. We'll talk about that much later on. But that is actually at the location of the pineal gland. Now, the pineal gland is a famous gland which is fairly well understood by science in the material body, but the location of it has been a source of myth and legend for thousands of years. It's been called the seat of the soul. It's been called all sorts of things. So we'll come back to that. So I'll leave that now and come back to the other one. Yeah, that's the brow chakra, or a link to the brow chakra, which is at the pituitary gland. And we'll talk about the brow chakra a lot later on. But the high mind has connections into each chakra point. So, for example, we talked about intuition last time, where there's connection points running through the major chakras from high mind into lower mind. So the high mind will have connection points at each major chakra, which intuition pathways will run through. So that's why I put that on this diagram here. But the actual brow chakra itself is in the energy body. And that's at the pituitary gland, just behind the eyes, the brow chakra. And while we're at it, the awareness filter, which I said was at the location of the pineal gland, that's also the location of the crown chakra. So it's a very, very important position, that pineal gland. It's the pineal gland in the material body, it's the crown chakra in the energy body, and it's the awareness filter in the higher mind. I'm just going back to the other one now, bear with me. There we go. So we're back to the soul. So moving on. So all of these frameworks that we've named here, the material body, the lower mind, the energy body, and the higher mind. These are all energy frameworks. They're made of energy. They're made of form. These are all vehicles. Now we call, one thing, we call the soul, and we're calling it a vehicle here. Now, a lot of people, this is just a language thing, but a lot of people have a different meaning for the soul, and they may call the soul what we call the true self. So I just want to bring your attention to that here we're actually using the word soul as a vehicle. And all of these frameworks are vehicles. But vehicles for what? They are all vehicles for awareness, of course. The true self. Awareness is non-physical. Awareness is unified. But it needs to have a root or an expression in the physical universe. That's why the journey of life has evolved. That's why the journey of growing awareness has evolved. So all these vehicles are vehicles for awareness, which gets channeled through the higher mind filter, which is what I just showed you in the higher mind anatomy at the location of the pineal gland. So the higher mind filter we're going to talk about in later lessons in anatomy. But really, it is the place where your awareness is happening. It's the place where your consciousness is happening. If you think about what you experience on a day-to-day basis, well, all the time, in fact, everything that you experience, think of it in terms of one massive sphere of experience. One big ball of experience where you're at the center, or you could say one big TV screen, one three-dimensional TV screen where you're at the center. That's all of your experience, everything that you can possibly experience. That is inside the filter. That is happening inside the higher mind filter. That organ, that higher mind filter, is a channel for awareness itself, for conscious experience. And it's got lots of different inputs going into it. From our senses, for example, our sensory organs in our bodies, touch, sight, hearing, all our senses are all fed, all that information is fed into the higher mind filter, and it is displayed in this three-dimensional TV screen where we are at the center. And that is our conscious experience. That is awareness. So that is being channeled through our soul. So the soul is a vehicle for awareness, for the true self. Now, it is quite a common theory already in both science and spiritual circles that the brain is like a receiver for consciousness. That is a very common theory already, and I'm sure you've probably heard of that already. Any questions? Yeah, so I read about calcification of the pineal gland a long time ago, and it was part of, really, I would say, a conspiracy theory, which is an interesting one. And the idea that pineal glands get calcified is obviously a scientific one. But there's a whole movement or a conspiracy that's grabbed hold of it and actually made it into something that doesn't exist. So, yes. Yeah. So I don't think that the calcification of the pineal gland has any impact on the subtle energy aspects of what's going on there. I don't think it has any impact on spirituality. I don't think it has any impact on spiritual evolution, awareness, the higher mind filter, or anything like that, to be honest with you. I'm not 100% sure. That's a very good question. But it would have evolved round about the same time that brains were evolving. I would say, I mean, in humans, it regulates the sleep-wake cycle. And it's part of, let me just think, I think it's part of, when you separate the brain into the hind, mid, and frontal cortex, for example, it's in the midbrains. You could say that it evolved not immediately when brain stems were evolving, but a little bit further on, let's say. And we could guess at maybe very small mammals, I suppose, something like that. But I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. Right, so the soul itself is an energy framework which allows the existence of the filter which channels awareness. So I think what you're asking is about the awareness, the conscious awareness, and that you're absolutely right that I would say that animals that don't have a filter don't have any conscious awareness. So when you look at an insect, for example, I don't see a filter there. There's no awareness filter, which leads me to believe that they are not conscious. They're wonderful little mechanical creatures, but they have no consciousness. So they haven't got to that point in evolution where they've evolved consciousness. And other animals, for example, such as mollusks, I can't see any consciousness in there. I can't see any filter in there. And it becomes quite interesting, actually, because some mollusks are actually fairly intelligent, like octopus. But also in fish, I don't see any conscious awareness filter in there, which leads me to think that fish are not actually conscious either. They have no consciousness. And some fish are very complex and very, you could say, highly adapted and highly skilled. Things like large sharks and other big fish, for example. And some groupers are quite intelligent. Some big grouper fish are quite intelligent. So it's an interesting discussion. But then going back to your last point about the pineal gland there, I don't know how they evolved together. So whether you could directly correlate it. If an animal's got a pineal gland, it's got a filter, or if it hasn't got a filter. I'm not 100% sure of that, to be honest with you. That's a very interesting question. But all of this stuff is we can put on the list, can't we? We can put on the list for research, because we're not going to. We can run on intuition, and we've been running on intuition for thousands of years. But now we can actually start to understand in detail through the scientific method. So that's part of what the research. I would say not. And now I know that might throw up a few questions. But I would say in terms of what the type of consciousness that we're actually talking about, I would say they don't have conscious experience. Now they have lots of other forms of response or communication and all sorts of other things going on in subtle energy. And of course, you could say that awareness is everywhere. So it's a different type of awareness. That is, it's not the awareness that's being channeled through an awareness filter, but there is actually awareness everywhere, even in empty space. So there are different ways which you could say there is consciousness in plants. But the one that we're talking about here is that through the filter, the type of conscious experience that you are experiencing right now. I would say that plants don't have that, because they don't have the organs to do it. And I know that I'll address something else here as well. I know that many people will say that they have talked to plants or heard things from plants. Now, I think that's a very valid thing to say. But I think that it's a slight misunderstanding, because I think that what's happening there is that the higher mind, a person's higher mind, has a level of communication with a plant through certain signals, through certain energy signals, and the higher mind can then translate that and pass it to the lower mind, and it comes out in a form of communication. But that doesn't mean, yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with you. Yeah, it's the that communication through the soil or through the fungal networks, I think you're referring to there, is a massive example that we give when we start talking about the collective mind in humans, in fact. So yeah, I totally agree. There's all sorts of communication that is going on with plants, and there's all sorts of stuff that science doesn't yet know about what's going on with plants. Yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, yeah. But I would say that they don't have a filter, so they're not don't have conscious experience, which is a specific type of awareness or consciousness. Dolphins and salmon. did you say? Yeah, yeah. Well, I think dolphins are very high in their level of evolution. I think dolphins are one of the types of animals that can jump into humans. So there's certain animals that can actually, as animals reincarnate, as souls reincarnate, they go through the evolution of species, and they learn as they go, and they jump the species gap when they're ready. And yes. All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, yeah. I think some of these myths will have grains of truth, and I think there are loads of different animal species that can jump into humans, like horses. Horses, I think, can jump into humans. Certain types of dogs, certain breeds of dog, not all of them, but some of them, and other elephants, for example, and dolphins and whales, and so yeah, I think it's the more highly evolved levels of animals that can jump into humans. But salmon, I think are not. I don't think salmon reincarnate. I don't think fish reincarnate, because I don't think they have a higher mind. Because I think their level of evolution has not yet got to the point, or I don't think it ever will, to be honest with you, because I think that reincarnation evolved in early reptiles and small mammals, but I think that's where it started. So the fish, I guess, missed out on that that particular bit of evolution, I think. So it started in mammals and reptiles, and then branched off in that direction, if you know. But again, this is just a mixture of intuition based and also looking at animals. And I've spent a long time looking at every time I see an animal. I spent a long time looking at the anatomy. So if there was any fish I used to keep fish, but if there's any fish in any place I go, I always try and look at what the anatomy is to see if I can see a higher mind, for example. So this is where I've got a lot of my theories, to be honest with you, about what has a higher mind and what hasn't got a higher mind, But we'll never find out for sure until we get that research done. Well, so the conscious awareness is within this. It's within the higher mind. That's the thing. The higher mind is an energy framework. It's made of form. It's like a car. It's like a vehicle. The soul, the higher mind. The soul is the high mind plus the energy body. But the high mind itself is where that conscious awareness is channeled through. So you could say that the soul is a channel for awareness. And that's through this filter, this awareness filter, this organ that the high mind has. And that's what holds this big three-dimensional TV screen that we can, that's the conscious awareness inside the filter. But it's lots of people use different words for different things here, and many people use the word soul for consciousness sometimes. So it gets a bit confusing. Well, you'd have to go on a case-by-case basis, I would say. But just because, if I'm saying that a goldfish doesn't have a high mind, it doesn't mean that there's no connection there, because it still has a low mind and a nervous system and all sorts of things going on. It's the same with plants. It doesn't mean that that it's dead. There's no connection there. There's all sorts going on that we don't know about. It's just that I guess I'm trying to be very specific about the reincarnation part, and and the reincarnation part is when a particular piece of the anatomy actually leaves and then goes into another generation. So I guess I'm trying to be specific about that. But that doesn't mean that there's not loads of different types of connections going on and all sorts of other stuff. Should we have a little break, actually, before we carry on? See you in a little bit. Yeah. All right. Shall we think about moving on? So we've talked about the concept of biological evolution being the same as biological reincarnation. Or let's say reincarnation is intertwined with biological reincarnation. It's part of the same process. It just hasn't been detected yet, hasn't been found yet. We talked about the idea of emotional memory being integral to the idea of biological reincarnation. Retention of emotional memory over subsequent generations. Now, while I'm at it, this idea of emotional memory being retained over subsequent generations without needing reproduction would explain quite a few other theories. It would explain things like animal instincts. Animal instincts, as yet, does not really have a very good scientific explanation. People don't really understand it completely. Why does a baby gazelle know to run away from a cheetah immediately as it gets born, jumps to its legs and run away? That happens even without parental guidance. So animals do know what they're supposed to do, or they know what they're supposed to run away from, for example, without being taught that by their parents. So the theory of reincarnation and emotional memory would actually explain animal instincts. The next thing we talked about was genetic memory, how there is a genetic link between incarnation to the next incarnation. That's been sort of shown in quite a lot of research that already exists out there. So let's look a little bit in more detail about how this can possibly work. So we're back to let me just go back one quickly. So back to this diagram of reincarnation, where you've got the material body plus lower mind. That's one incarnation. That's the orange and yellowy bits. And you've got the reincarnating soul or memory, which is in blue, which is incarnating and incarnating again and again and again. So let's look a little bit closer at one particular incarnation. So that's the material body, that orangey bit there. That's the lower mind, the yellow bit. The blue bit is the energy body, represents the energy body. And then the very light blue represents the higher mind inside the energy body. Now that black bit around the outside represents karma or karma emotion, or in this case, the karmic personality spectrum. Because, and it's in black around the edges, because this is actually what is around the energy body. It's in the skin of the energy body. When we look at the energy body and we see the layers of the energy body, we can see that karmic personality spectrum in the outside skin of the energy body. Now, this is a fairly well-known concept out there already, that you can see people's karma as colors in the, they may use the word aura, they may use the word energy body, they may use the word, whatever words they use. It's kind of out there already. It's roughly intuitively known. So it's a karmic personality spectrum that is laid or is held in the outside layers of the energy body. And that is karma emotion, lots and lots of cells with karma emotion in it. This is all made of subtle energy, all made of magnetic. But that karmic personality spectrum is what gets dragged through from incarnation to incarnation. And it forms the basis of the personality in an incarnation. When we first get born, we have a karmic personality spectrum. Everything else is pretty blank, isn't it? Well, genetics plays a part in shaping our personality. But then after that, it's environment, isn't it? Our upbringing. So really, the material body and the lower mind is a fairly blank slate, apart from its genetics. But we have actually a karmic personality spectrum in the energy body, which starts to burn. It starts to get processed as soon as we're born. And that's producing emotions. And then that gets intertwined into our personality, and the new personality grows in that incarnation. So how does the karmic personality spectrum get retained? Well, it's because of these arrows here. You've got emotional memory, which gets passed into the lower mind and material body at the start of an incarnation. And then at the end of an incarnation, it gets passed back to the energy body. Now that is karma emotion. Now when we go through the lessons on karma, we'll talk about that in much greater detail. But basically, karma emotion gets burnt, starts burning at the start of your incarnation. And at the same time, we're producing karma all the way through our lives as well, producing karma emotion all the way through our lives, through our thinking patterns. And what we've produced at the end of our lives then gets transferred into the energy body at the end of our lives. And that actually happens after death, because I'll just go over it very quickly here. We'll talk about this in the karma lesson. But when we produce karma during a lifetime, when we're producing karma in the lower mind, it gets stored in the lower mind karma storage in the chest area. And that produces, or that holds, current life karma all the way through your life. But then at the end of your life, once you leave the material body, the lower mind goes with the soul briefly. So at death, you could say that the soul actually is the higher mind, the energy body, and the lower mind, because the lower mind goes with it, but just briefly. It only stays long enough to transfer the karma that it's produced from the lower mind storage into the energy body storage. And then the lower mind drops away, and then the soul is then ready to incarnate again. But it's kept that emotional memory in the outside layers of the energy body, that emotional memory, that karma. So that's emotional memory. There is also genetics involved here as well. Yeah? Right, so this is a little bit, how long is a piece of string? But there are some things that dictate it. So and there's lots of variables here, because if a higher mind is a sleeping higher mind, i.e. it hasn't yet become aware of its own reincarnation, it's a young soul. Let's call it a young soul. Or animals, for example, reincarnate automatically, and their higher minds are not aware of their reincarnation. Now, if that happens, then you just have to wait for the natural processes to happen. So in humans, for a sleeping higher mind, that can take anywhere between 50 and 100 years. But the higher mind, once it becomes an aware or awake higher mind, and it starts to be able to manipulate the processes involved in between incarnations, then that higher mind can actually change that, and it can do it much, much quicker. So if a well-developed soul can actually do it very, very quickly, I mean, literally in hours or days if it wants to. This is why you get such a massive range of time in between incarnations. Depends if it's happening automatically and naturally, or whether the high mind is taking control of it and is doing it very quickly. There's loads of factors involved, and one factor is the one I mentioned, which is whether it's happening purposefully or whether it's happening completely randomly or naturally. But there are other factors involved as well. For example, the high mind may be waiting for somebody. The higher mind may be waiting because it's got a life plan and it's organized a life plan with somebody else. So it may wait for them to finish their incarnation and time their next incarnations together, for example. Or there may be other things that soul is doing. That soul might be spending a lot of time in an astral plane somewhere and doing something else, and then it might come back and for its next incarnation. There's loads of different reasons why that could be. I think so. Well, let me say a few things and see if any of it lands. Firstly, somebody who is ready for a Kundalini awakening, somebody who's ready for self-realization in this incarnation, their life plan will be completely mapped out, and it will not be able to go wrong or have any sort of error in it, because the higher mind is that developed that it can control every aspect of its life plan, and it can control every aspect of its lower mind, keeping the lower mind on track through intuition. So a very well-developed soul, its life plan goes 99.9% to plan, let's say. A less developed soul, let's say, maybe down at the solar plexus level of growth of the Kundalini system or something like that, may be a mixture of managing to keep the lower mind on the life plan, but also the making real mistakes as well. So the lower mind may come off the life plan and make a real mistake. That's the difference between a real mistake and a false or a false mistake. So a very well-developed soul, even though somebody may think they're making mistakes, they're not real mistakes, because it's part of their life plan. It's part of their lesson learning life plan. It just feels like a mistake at the time. But then a less developed soul, maybe at the solar plexus level, let's say, they have a life plan, because the high mind is aware and awake, and it's making life plan, and it's got soul families and stuff. Its lower mind, its intuition pathways are not 100% developed, so it keeps this lower mind on a life plan, kind of, but then the life plans, the lower mind sometimes deviates and makes real mistakes. And this is when external factors can come in, like accidents and things like that. Unplanned accidents can happen because the higher mind may have planned a life plan with a certain amount of foresight, but the lower mind deviated from it, and then something went and happened. So that's going off the higher mind's life plan. But always remember that there is actually an infinite plan as well, the infinite plan of the source. So you can, there is a an infinite plan which can be applied to everyone as well. That's a whole other subject which we're going to go into later on, though, to be honest. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so going back to the diagram then. So we've got emotional memory that comes in as the karmic personality spectrum and then gets transferred back to the energy body after the life. Ah, hello. That's all right. No worries. Right. So yeah, I think what you're talking about then is after death. Is that what you mean? After death, the soul. Well, okay. So let's go to the start of what you mentioned about certain people who are young souls. Let's say. Now, some people, some humans have not. Their high minds have not yet become aware of their own reincarnation. That means they haven't even yet started building their Kundalini system. So these types of people or these types of souls haven't got any intuition from their high mind at all. That poor lower mind is on its own, to be honest with you. There is no guidance from its higher mind. There's no spiritual development guidance. There's no moral guidance coming from the higher mind. So that lower mind, you could say, is on its own. So then it's subject to its own environment, upbringing, and also karma, its own karmic personality spectrum. It grows only with those things happening. So basically, that's how really horrible things can happen in the world. That's how people can do really horrible things, because they haven't got any guidance from their high mind, and they are just subject to their own upbringing, basically, and karma levels. Now, moving on to the next part of your question about being attached to the material plane. So this is a root chakra thing, isn't it? It's being at the level of the root chakra, being attached to material things, material life, material body. Now, when somebody is at that level of development, when they die, it's very possible that they have trouble moving on, and that happens all the time. You're absolutely right. There are hundreds and hundreds of souls that are just hanging around in the ground plane, which is the plane that you find yourself in just after you've died. And this is a natural thing. There's loads of animal souls as well. This is a completely natural thing. There are hundreds of souls that are just floating around in their natural state of being attracted to various things, and quite often they're attracted to certain energy centers and things like that. Big trees, for example, attract loads of souls, and they start sticking to them. So they're just sort of attracted naturally to things, because this is how reincarnation actually works, is in terms of when it's done automatically, naturally. The soul there's some sort of attraction. So the soul has some sort of mechanism of being attracted to things, because it's naturally trying to find its next incarnation. So it sort of bumbles along, bumping into things with some sort of basic attraction, trying to find, I don't know what it is, but it's going to be something in the gestation period or something like that is emitting signals, and it attracts souls. So souls are just being attracted to things, and quite often they get it completely wrong, you could say, and they're attracted to certain things in the collective mind, and they congregate, basically. So yeah, and that can happen for a long time, and that's why the period of time in between incarnations can be up to like 100 years or something like that, and so it just depends when that soul actually randomly bumps into its next incarnation. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And you can actually help move these people on. Yeah, they need to go to another place in the collective mind to carry on their journey. And and also the mind is also locked in the astral planes as well, so in a dream world. And that's another thing that happens, is that that person is there, but in form, their soul is there, but their mind is actually locked in the astral planes in a dream world as well. Yeah, I think that happens quite a lot. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely, especially in the dream world, because that comes down to lucidity. If you've ever had a lucid dream, you know that there's different levels of lucidity in a dream, and it's a bit like that in between incarnations. And this goes into the subject of dream yoga, which is a section of Tibetan Buddhism. And they've got a whole section about dream yoga, about how to start learning about lucid dreaming, because it will then help you after an incarnation, because it's very similar to lucid dreaming. So if you have a very low level of lucidity in after you've died, then you kind of sometimes know a little bit what's going on. You don't really know what's going on, so it's very easy to not know that you've died. Absolutely. Well, I think that it's down to anatomy, basically. So the higher mind and the energy body have to go in to the lower mind and material body. They've got to go in, and things have got to link up. So there's various gluing points around the body that actually link up. The chakras are a gluing point between all the frameworks. The bindu is also a gluing point between all the frameworks. And also the energy body has got to link up with the lower mind circulation system, because subtle energy has got to start going into every cell of the material body. And we talked about this about the meridian system, didn't we? So the meridian system has to be linked into every cell of the material body. Now, it goes from the meridian system through into the lower mind circulation system, and then from there into every cell of the material body. We're going to talk about that in a second, actually. So all of those connections have to be plugged in, you could say. So when does it happen? Well, you can imagine roughly, because the anatomy of the baby has to be grown to a certain point to be able to accept all those connections. So that's the limiting factor. How much of anatomy has grown in the embryo that the anatomy can actually start connecting up. And as a rough guide, I would say it's around halfway through. Around halfway through. Right then, so let me crack on with some more details about how it actually works, because this is the basis of our research project now we're going to talk about. So let's look deeper into the cell. Now, to understand exactly what's going on, then we've got to just talk about some basic cell anatomy. So this is an example of the cell. So the human body is made up of trillions and trillions of cells, and they've all got different specialized roles, and they're all different shapes, and they all do different things. So this is just an example of a typical human cell or typical animal cell. It's got a cell membrane around the outside that keeps everything in. It's got some ribosomes. Those little yellow things are called ribosomes. You don't need to worry too much about that, to be honest with you. But ribosomes make proteins. Ribosomes make proteins from genetic information. Genes, DNA, holds information, and then ribosomes translates that information into lots of different proteins. And then from then on, everything in the body is created. And the cytoplasm, that's just the insides, the jelly-like structure inside the cell. Now, don't worry too much about this. I'm just trying to paint a picture for what I'm about to try and explain. Oh, and I should say that a lot of what we've been talking about today is nowhere near yet part of mainstream science, of course. But some parts of this lesson are part of mainstream science already. This, of course, is part of mainstream science. It's very well known, perfectly acceptable scientific fact, the cell and all the constituents of the cell. Okay, I will try and remember to say which parts are already fully accepted science and which parts are our theories that we're adding on for as a basis to our research project. So next, the nucleus in the middle of the cell is where all the DNA is held. That's where all the genes are, that's where the DNA is, and that's in the nucleus. The DNA is a molecule, a long molecule, wrapped up tightly in lots of little bundles, and those little bundles are called chromosomes. So all that, the instructions for the body, instructions for the material body, is all held in that genetic information. It's instructions for the material body, but it's also regulation of the material body. Throughout our lives, DNA and genes are working very hard to regulate our bodies all the way through our lives. And see that little green, well, in this diagram, it's green, oblong little sausagey thing, that is a mitochondria. So mitochondria are the batteries of the cell, or some people call them the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria are producing the energy which powers the material body. And we talked a little bit about this in the bioenergy layer and how important mitochondria are. So mitochondria produce ATP energy. ATP is just a molecule, an energy carrying molecule. And that ATP molecule is responsible, all the different ATP molecules in the body are all responsible for powering everything that's going on in the material body. So the next thing is epigenetics. This is also now part of mainstream science. So these genes, these strings of DNA molecules have genes. A section of that DNA molecule can be called a gene. And these genes can be switched on and off. All the way through our lives, these genes get switched on and off. And lots of different things can affect how these genes get regulated. Things like environmental things going on outside us, nutritional elements, what we feed our bodies can actually affect our genetics. And emotional factors like stress and things like that. These can all affect the epigenetics of our DNA. And this can actually get passed on. This can actually get passed on to our offspring. And we're talking about normal reproduction there. We're not talking about necessarily reincarnation. This is what's known in science already about epigenetics. So, the nuclear DNA in the nucleus, that controls most body functions. It controls how to make a body in the first place, and it controls lots of functions around the body. Now, one thing that's more recently known in science is that mitochondrial DNA, and mitochondria have their own sets of DNA, which is not part of the nuclear DNA. Mitochondrial DNA can actually affect the expression of nuclear DNA. That means that there is a communication between the two DNAs, between nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA. And the mitochondrial DNA can actually regulate the nuclear DNA, which means it can affect what the nuclear DNA is doing in the cell. This is part of epigenetics, which is well known now. Now, this is integral to our theory of reincarnation, this mitochondrial DNA, and how it can regulate what's going on in the cell just by being part of epigenetics. So let's look at mitochondria in just a little bit more detail. So that's what half a mitochondria looks like. If you chop it in half, have a look inside. See those little loops in there? Those little loops are the mitochondrial DNA. There's a lot less DNA than in nuclear DNA. But they form little loops. And this is where the Krebs cycle is happening as well. Do you remember we talked about the Krebs cycle in the bioenergy layer? The Krebs cycle is that chemical reaction that happens in every cell of the body, and it makes ATP energy. And it was food plus oxygen equals carbon dioxide plus ATP energy. That was the reaction that's going on in there. That's actually happening in mitochondria. So the Krebs cycle is happening within the cytoplasm of mitochondria, or inside the mitochondria. By the way, mitochondria originally used to be bacteria. Little bacteria cells originally. Now, bacteria are much smaller types of cells than animal cells. Now, originally, some way back in evolution, millions of years ago in the evolution, a bacteria would have got trapped in or ingested somehow into a cell, and then it became incorporated in that cell. And then over many, many years or millions of years, they started working together. And the ATP that was being produced by the bacteria was actually beneficial for the cell. This is how evolution works. Lots of small incremental changes, but then over long periods of time creates massive evolutionary changes. So now we've got all these descendants of bacteria in every single cell of the material body, and they are producing ATP energy for us. And that's the Krebs cycle. Now, don't forget here that the meridian system delivers energy to every cell of the body. And the reason we think it's because the Krebs cycle needs it. So the Krebs cycle is part of mainstream science. No problem, of course. Mitochondria, all part of mainstream science. Meridians are not, of course, and our theory that meridians exist to supply subtle energy to every cell of the body is not yet part of mainstream science, of course. But what we're saying is that it gets delivered to each mitochondria, because that's where the Krebs cycle is happening, and that's where it needs a constant supply of subtle energy. Now, this is where we bring in the reincarnation theory, biological reincarnation. This is where we think that we can prove the existence of reincarnation. Because we think that there is a higher mind signature in the DNA of mitochondria. The theory goes that the higher mind actually holds a complete set of genetics in subtle energy. We're not talking matter here, we're talking about in the higher mind, in magnetic energy. It holds a complete set of genetics of all of the incarnations it's ever been in. Now, that will be an end game to try and, or an end goal to try and find evidence for, but that's going to be so way down the line. But that genetic memory is being transferred across different individuals in a species. So it's a way of widening the gene pool in a species of animal. When a soul comes into an incarnation, there's a little part of the higher mind which changes some of the genes in the material body. And we're saying that it does it through the mitochondria, because the mitochondria can impact the cell with epigenetics. It's involved in epigenetics. It can impact or have a result because of its connection to the nuclear DNA. So we're saying that in every single person there is a higher mind signature, and it's in the mitochondrial DNA. And we need to find that signature. That's what our research project is based around. Let me carry on. I'll come back to that. So the mitochondria is there for ATP production. We're saying it's got a higher mind signature in that DNA, which can alter the nuclear DNA expression. That's a common word, gene expression. That's the output of the genome, the output of the DNA. Now, nuclear DNA expression regulates the body, including emotions. So now you can start to see that the higher mind can have an impact on our emotions through the mitochondrial DNA. Now, another interesting point is that mitochondrial DNA, or mitochondria, are passed down the maternal line. So they're only inherited from your mother. So I have mitochondria, and the DNA in the mitochondria come from my mother, not from my father. And that's the same for everybody. The paternal, in the father's mitochondria does not get passed down to the offspring. But I'll talk about that later on when we talk about the research. So now let's move on to emotional memory. So we've talked about how genetics can be transferred from the higher mind into the lower mind. Now let's talk about the emotional memory. So just going back to this diagram to start with, we've got the karmic personality spectrum. So karma emotion is transferred into or is burnt in the karma emotion engine in an incarnation. And then karma produced is transferred back to the karmic personality spectrum in the energy body. So just a little bit of revision here about the karmic spectrum. The karmic spectrum, and you've seen this before, I think, in the bioenergy lab. So the karmic spectrum is a spectrum of karma in the outside layers of the energy body. And these are the colors of the karmic spectrum. And if you look at the energy body skin, you'll actually see like a mosaic of color with different splodges. And these splodges are personality traits. So that one there you can see in the middle there is a negative personality trait, with the black karma, the heavy karma in the middle, then moving to brown karma, and then moving to grey karma, lighter forms of karma. So that's a personality characteristic. Again, more reminder about the emotion engine, because you've seen this before as well, and it matters to how that emotional memory is actually activated. So thinking produces emotional energy. Emotional energy then circulates around the energy body and activates one of the emotion chakras. The emotion chakra then activates the emotion in the material body, which then activates more of the thinking process. Now, the important bit that I'm going to go over in a second now is how the emotion chakras activates the emotion in the material body. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But this emotional cycle is actually a karma emotion engine. If you add karma into it, it becomes the karma emotion engine. So you've seen this before as well in the emotional lab. So this is just a reminder that thinking creates new karma. Karma is produced and then stored in the energy body, which you could call a fuel tank. And then that old karma gets burnt in the engine, or processed, you could say. And that produces the emotion that you feel. So, and then that activates more of the thinking, which is producing more of the karma. This is the wheel of karma. So when we're thinking, we're producing karma. When we're feeling an emotion, we're burning old karma. Now back to the mitochondria and how mitochondria are the conduit for activating the emotions that coming from karma. So we know that nuclear DNA expression regulates the body, including the emotions. And karma emotion, which is stored in the energy body from previous incarnations, is burnt in the karma emotion engine. So that means that the chakras can actually activate that process through the mitochondria. So signals are sent from the chakras, the emotion chakras, to the cellular mitochondria in the limbic system in the brain, which is responsible for emotions. That's how the chakras activate the emotions in the body. They are activating the mitochondria in the limbic system in the brain, which is activating the nuclear DNA expression, which then creates whatever hormone is needed, which then gets released into the bloodstream and causes the emotion. So this is the route from karma emotion all the way through to feeling and emotions. The karma that's stored in the energy body all the way through to actually feeling that emotion. And it's through the mitochondria that it does it. So the karma is burnt. Let's go through the little process here. So the karma is processed from the outside layers of the energy body by the organs in the lower mind. Then emotional energy is produced from that particular karma. That circulates around the energy body. It activates one of the emotion chakras that it's coded for. Then that emotion chakra sends signals to the mitochondria in the limbic system in the brain, and those mitochondria are part of the epigenetics of that cell, so they can actually regulate the nuclear DNA. The nuclear DNA then produces or gets activated or switched on. Those genes are switched on to produce whatever it is needed, a particular hormone, let's say adrenaline or something like that. Or that'll be in the adrenal glands, but something in the limbic system, whatever hormone it is produced by that cell. It's dished out by that cell, then it goes into the bloodstream, and then it goes and activates that emotional response in the body. And that's what I've just explained there. Okay, I'm going to summarize this in a minute so it makes it clearer. So in summary, for the lesson. So first of all, anatomy. The soul is the energy body plus the higher mind, and it's made of magnetic energy. The incarnation is the lower mind plus the material body. Emotional memory and genetic memory are dragged through many incarnations. That's the basis of reincarnation, really, emotional memory and genetic memory. Now, genetic memory is inserted into the mitochondrial DNA. That's the higher mind signature. So when a higher mind enters, or a soul enters an embryo, it inserts some genetic memory into the mitochondrial DNA. And in fact, it has a constant access to the mitochondrial DNA. And if you can imagine there must be a lot of pathways running into the mitochondria, because there's pathways coming from the meridian system, there's pathways coming from the karmic system, there's also pathways coming from the higher mind as well, with the higher mind signature. So that mitochondria is a very important little bit of kit. So mitochondrial DNA affects the gene expression of the nuclear DNA in cell nuclei, or the nucleus of the cell. That's through epigenetics. And emotional memory. Karma emotion is burnt in the karma emotion engine. In this process, signals are sent from the chakras to the cellular mitochondria in the limbic system. That's the little process I just went through. The gene expression of the cells in the limbic system controls emotional activity. And finally, reincarnation project. So we're going to have a 7-phase research project, and we're going to try and find evidence for all of the above. And just imagine the impact on healthcare, the impact on not only cultural impacts of evidence of reincarnation, but also on the whole of science and the biology of anatomy. Genetics is a whole new field of genetics, a whole new lineage of genetics that is completely unknown, and the impact that can have on disease and health, and also mental health. So it can have huge impacts on society. Right. That's an interesting question for sure. And if you build a if you build a material body, then if a soul comes into it, then it's going to be obviously a different soul. If you have two of them, it's going to be two different souls. Yeah, but then the only thing I can think of what would happen there is that the process will still happen. The mitochondrial DNA, just you've then changed the lineage, haven't you? So the high mind will still insert its signature, and the processes will still happen in the same way. But you've messed with the maternal lineage. That's what's happened, isn't it? So I don't think that has an impact on that person's life, though, because it's just a history that you're looking at with maternal lineage. And also, we think that with the mitochondrial DNA, that there is no... It's not a complete history, because the mitochondrial DNA is very small. It's just a loop of DNA. It doesn't have enough room in it to have, let's say, thousands of high mind signatures. Otherwise, it would be massive. So we kind of think that it gets deleted or lost as it goes. So you probably only get a certain amount of history in that maternal lineage. But we're not 100% sure, of course, because we haven't tested the theory properly to find out. But there are also other sort of little signals that it's the mitochondrial DNA, and that is there's a lot of what they call junk mutations in mitochondrial DNA that they don't know what the purpose is. So there's a lot of sequences in mitochondrial DNA. They just call them mutations that changes that they don't know what the purpose is. So that they call it junk at the moment. But we think that that's actually part of the higher mind signatures, and it does actually have a purpose. Yeah, so both is the answer. So you've got it depends if the higher mind is an awake higher mind or a sleeping higher mind. So if it's a sleeping higher mind, then it just happens quite randomly. I say randomly. Nothing's truly random because of the infinite plan of the source. But in terms of purposeful, it's not purposeful. Reincarnation, so it just happens automatically. The soul will reincarnate into the first embryo it encounters. Let's put it that way. However, when the higher mind evolves to a certain level of development, it starts to be able to manipulate the process. It also starts to make soul families and group together with other higher minds of similar development, and then it starts to make life plans, and then it will start, at this point, it will start to choose its incarnations, because if you have a life plan, then you choose your incarnation. And so the higher mind will have an agreement with the parents, if the parents are conscious, or if the parents, higher minds, are not sleeping, I should say. And then at that point, it's arranged, and you know the higher mind knows where it's going. It may have to wait a particular time frame before it gets there to fit in with the life plan. But yeah, that's purposeful reincarnation, and there's also lots of evidence for that as well in the literature and the evidence that's been conducted on reincarnation so far. There's plenty of evidence for that from people's mainly children's memories about meeting their parents or talking to their parents before they incarnate, things like that. And of course, I should say that many of us here have reincarnational memories as well. So I remember many of my past lives, about 20 of my different past lives now, and I remember the time in between my past lives as well. So I remember very clearly what happened in between my last life and this life, and I remember fairly clearly the incarnation before that as well. But then before that, it gets a bit hazy, to be honest with you. So you can actually remember these things as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that shows, it's another little sign that reincarnation exists. And twins is a very good example here. You can have twins with roughly the same upbringing, roughly the same, or pretty much the same genetics, but they can be very different babies. And one could be always crying and always upset, and the other one can be very smooth and very calm. And that's to do with the karmic personality spectrum that is completely different in both babies. That karma starts burning, and when that karma starts burning, that baby starts crying. We're talking about negative karma there, but yeah, absolutely, it could certainly help a lot of people, and it's just our culture that doesn't really doesn't really accept it. In Eastern cultures, it's very different. Round about halfway through, because it's about the anatomy. It's about the anatomy that has to have grown in the baby to accept all the connections into the anatomy, basically, like the chakras, the gluon points, the bindu, the gluon points, and all the connections from the meridians into the baby. So it's going to be round about halfway, but it doesn't have to be halfway. It can be further on. So, for example, I think that it's about the umbilical cord, really. I think it can probably happen all the way through until the umbilical cord is cut, because the umbilical cord is actually supplying all the nutrients, all the blood, everything is going from the mother into the embryo. I think that there are connections through that umbilical cord in subtle energy as well. So the baby is getting its subtle energy from the mother as well, originally. So from her meridian system and through the umbilical cord into the baby. So when that umbilical cord is cut, that baby needs to have its own supply of subtle energy through its own meridians. That means that the energy body has to be in before that umbilical cord is cut, basically. So I think that's probably the limit of where the soul can enter the body. There's a start limit halfway through the pregnancy when the anatomy is grown, and then there is a final limit of when the umbilical cord is cut. Lovely. By the way, the assignment. By the way, there's no real assignment in this for this particular lesson. We're just going to ask for you to use the time, if you like, to catch up on previous assignments. So there's no actual assignment for this lesson, apart from one particular question that we want to ask you, and that is to actually start to think about past lives and try to think about different places and times in history that you might have a particular affinity for. Any times or places that you have you're drawn to, or you're obsessed with, or something like that, where you may have had some incarnations, and start thinking about your own previous incarnations, because it's part of the journey of self-realization to start remembering your own incarnations. So we just want to start the process. So start thinking about that. If you want to jot something down, then great. All right, lovely. See you guys next week then. Have a good week. Okay, bye bye.